Hi folks, HR Funk here. In front of the camera with a very special handgun to me. This is my grandfather's high standard Sport King 22 semi-automatic pistol. And according to the serial number of this pistol, Grandpa purchased this in 1953, or at least that was the year it was manufactured. And this pistol actually is in the possession of my brother currently. And when I was over there for Thanksgiving a couple of weeks ago, he mentioned that he was having some problems with this handgun and it was no longer properly cycling rounds of ammunition into the chamber. And we tried test firing it outside that day. And what I think is going on is the recoil spring in this particular pistol has become kind of tired over the course of the last 71 years. And there's an interesting side story to this. In 1966, the year I was born, Grandpa bought another one of these same handguns, presumably because he was worried that this one might wear out at some point and then he wouldn't have a handgun. And my grandfather was a gentleman farmer here in Ohio. He was a lifelong hunter. So Grandpa bought that second handgun, which I have. It's actually been in a couple of videos, and it is in my safe upstairs as insurance just in case this one stopped working. And it turns out it made it 70 plus years before it actually needs some kind of a repair. So in this video, I'm going to be disassembling and repairing Grandpa's handgun by replacing the recoil spring, and if I see anything else that needs taken care of along the way, I'll be doing that as well. I'm going to bring you all along. You can see exactly what I'm doing. We'll head out to the range then and test fire this pistol and make sure everything is up to snuff again. And hopefully after that, it'll be ready for another 70 years. So here we go. Okay, here we go, working on Grandpa's 1953 vintage high standard Sport King. And by the way, as I'm working on this pistol, take a look at the old school machining and workmanship. You'll notice that it is not absolutely perfect by today's standards. If you look closely, particularly when I start to disassemble these major parts, that there are some machining marks that you can see. But for when this handgun was made and for the amount of skill that was required to machine these parts and get the handgun to work properly, I think it's pretty impressive. We'll start with basic disassembly. As always, the first thing is to make sure that you're working with an unloaded firearm. And it absolutely is unloaded. By the way, this vintage of the high standard Sport King does not have a slide lock, so there's no last round slide lock open when you're firing, and there's no way to lock it open right now for when I'm working on it. But to disassemble the pistol, you'll notice this little takedown stud right here. I am going to pull back just slightly on the slide, just to take a little bit of tension off of there, and I'm going to pull forward on this, which will allow me to slide the barrel off the front of the frame. And we'll put that off to the side right now. Now I'm going to keep control of the slide and just allow it to come off easily. If I just released it back there, it would have shot off the frame like it was in a slingshot. But this is the part we're going to be working on, so I'll lay the frame assembly off to the side and we'll start our disassembly of the slide. Now before I go on, I want to point out a couple of things. First off, if we look at the face of the slide, what essentially is the bolt face or the breech face here, you can see the firing pin right there, and we can see up here at about the 2 o'clock position, there is a plug. That plug retains the recoil spring, which you can see right there. The recoil spring lives in a groove and it butts up against the back of the slide right there. And the way it works, you can see the back of that plug right there. That mates up against this surface, if I can get it lined up here, right here. So when the slide moves backward under the impetus of a round that has been fired, it compresses the recoil spring. As it pushes against that surface, it moves back, and when it gets to full compression, then it starts to push the slide back forward to chamber the next cartridge. So that is the spring that has become tired after 70 plus years of use, and that's the one we're going to be replacing. In order to remove this plunger, I'm going to have to drift out this pin. That is the pin that retains the plunger that keeps the recoil spring in place. So I'm going to get my armorer's block in just a moment here, and we'll start to remove that. Now, one of the things I'm going to have to be careful of is to make sure that this does not go shooting across the room when I remove this pin. When I have a punch inside there, that will retain it, but when I remove the punch, that thing could launch, so I'll have to be careful of that. So purportedly, you can drive these pins either way, but I know a lot of times these pinholes are tapered so that as you drive them down farther and farther into the hole, they get tighter and tighter to secure them in place. So for that reason, I'm going to be driving this one out from the bottom up, and then when I reinstall it, I'll drive it back down in from the top going down. In order to do that, I'm going to position this in my vise because I'm going to be driving out the pin that you can see right here, and I want to make sure it stays very steady for the first few taps until I get it to move. Then I'll put it down on my armorer's block and drive it out the rest of the way. So here you can see the slide secured in my vise, and our pin is right here. You might not be able to see that on camera, and I'm just going to tap this a few times lightly. All I want to do is get it started. Then I'll move it back to my armorer's block. I think it's started just a little bit there. Let's turn it over and see if we've accomplished anything. And if it moved, it was a tiny bit. Let's move it back over to the armorer's block and see if I can finish driving that thing out of there. So let's see now if I can drive that pin the rest of the way out. And it's been sitting in that same place for 70 years, so it's not in any big hurry to come out of there. But it's removed. I'm going to lay it right here. Now, as I said, when I remove the punch, I have to be a little bit careful that that does not come shooting out of there, and it did not. So let me grab a different punch. So I've got a bigger punch. I actually have an assortment of punches around here, but this should make things a little easier as I can compress that spring better now. There we go. And by driving it down inside my armorer's block, I captured the spring. And the inside of the armorer's block is magnetic, so that caught the plug. Now I can remove the old recoil spring, just like that. And I'm going to compare this old spring to the new one I'm about to put on, and you'll be able to see how much length this has lost over the course of the last 7 decades. So here's the new recoil spring from Wolf Gun Springs, next to the one that I just took out of the slide. And you can see that this one is about probably a third longer. Now, one thing that concerns me just a little bit is I just counted the coils on both of these, and the original spring has about 34 coils. The replacement spring has significantly more than that. I think I came up with 48 when I counted these. Now, this is from Wolf Gun Springs, and it's supposed to be a replacement spring for the high standard pistols, but I'm a little concerned. I'll see what happens when I start to install this. If I can get it in place and it runs properly in the pistol, that's really all I care about. But I hope this is not a high pressure spring that might cause some issues with functioning when I get it all put back together. So I'm going to remove the old spring from the plunger, and it's a tight fit still after all these years. And you notice on the spring that I took off, there is a closed end of the spring and there is an open end. And on the replacement spring, we have the same thing. There's a closed end here and an open end on this end. So I'm going to reinstall the plunger on the closed end as it was on the original spring. And by the way, off camera, I took a moment to clean out this hole where the recoil spring lives, and I should be able to just drop that back down in place. There it goes, just like that. Now to reinstall the plug to hold the recoil spring in place, I'm probably going to have to employ a tool to depress the recoil spring and then get this back in there. So let's see what I can come up with here. So I now have yet another punch, and I am going to attempt to compress the recoil spring with this larger punch, and then I'll use this smaller one to secure it in position while I replace the plug and get it ready to drive the pin back in to hold it in place. Now the important thing here is not to shoot anything across the shop. So I'll get this started here. And I just realized you can't see what I'm doing. All I did was press the spring back down inside, and then I'm going to try to hold it in that position until I can get my punch in place. This is one of these operations where an extra hand, or maybe even a few extra fingers, might be helpful. Okay, so I've got the spring compressed down inside the slide, and I'm going to try to secure it in place. All right, so I'm holding it there. And now, one of the things with this plug is it is contoured to match that radius right there on the inside of the slide. So I've got to try to replace that so it's in there properly. And now I can remove my punch, and I'm going to have to line this up so that I have the hole in the proper place so I can drive the pin through the slide and through the plug. And I'm trying to rotate that with my finger until I can see light coming through. And that is not working too well. Something tells me that High Standard had a fixture for doing this that would hold everything in place and make it very easy to install the pin. But lacking such a thing, I'm going to have to try to do this the old-fashioned way. And if this ends up taking too long, I'll edit the video Now I just noticed that I can hold that with my thumbnail because there is a shelf on there, and that allowed me to rotate it to just about where it needs to be. still can't see any. There we go. So I've located the hole properly right there. So I'm going to try to hold it in that exact orientation as I get the pin started. And the pin, I know, was rounded on top to begin with and flat on the bottom. So I'm going to place it in here so the rounded part is on top once again. And the pin is now started down into the hole. So all I have to do is use my plastic hammer and tap that back into place. And we want to make sure that it's not protruding down into the slide here where it's going to impede the movement of the slide as it reciprocates on the frame. And it's still not where I want it, but I should be able to use a bigger punch now. That ought to do the trick. So now the only thing left is to reassemble Grandpa's pistol. So I'll position the slide on the frame, and it seems to be moving properly. And I'll pull it back just slightly. Again, look at this old school machining. We've got this groove in the bottom of the barrel that mates with a slot in the frame, and this just slides into position just like that. All right, that feels much more positive, and fortunately it does not feel like it's oversprung. It just feels like it's got good positive functioning. So I think that spring with more coils is not going to cause any problem. Last thing is the fun part. Now we get to go out and test fire Grandpa's pistol and make sure that it's still working properly. So it's the moment of truth, folks. It's time to head out to the range and see if I accomplished anything. I'll be loading up the magazine with 10 rounds of 22 long rifle ammunition, and we'll see how it runs. So there you go, folks. That's going to do it for today's video. Grandpa's pistol is running fine again. My grandfather passed away in 2011 at the age of 91, but I still want to say Merry Christmas, Grandpa. Your pistol is running just fine again, and very shortly it's going to be going back to my brother, probably when I see him at Christmas time. So anyway, if you have any questions or comments, as always, make sure you forward those to me. Remember, stop by hrfunk.com and check out the news and information page there to see what's going on with the channel here. And also stop by the products page, look for the links to the manufacturers whose products I've reviewed here on the channel, and also check out the information right below those links for some codes that might save you a couple of bucks if you make any purchases from those manufacturers. See you next time, folks. And until then, good shooting. Bye-bye.